Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our webinar is going to begin. I'm Steve Love, President and CEO of the Dallas-Fort Worth Hospital Council, and we want to thank you for participating in this educational webinar, and we're hosting it in coordination with Abilene Christian University, who is an associate member and supporter of the Dallas-Fort Worth Hospital Council. Today's topic is identifying and preventing violence in the workplace. And as we all know, our hospitals a workplace that has to deal with violence on a daily basis. It's a hot topic, and for over a century, Abilene Christian University has really served as a hub of academic excellence, and they serve students throughout Texas and throughout the nation. Through undergraduate programs and graduate programs, they equip their students so that they can lead lives, and they do it through leadership, and they empower them through exceptional teaching. Today, they even have a campus here in North Dallas. It's in Addison, and it has online courses in healthcare and nursing. With that said, we're delighted that our guest speaker today is Dr. Brenda McAdoo, a former FBI hostage negotiator, and she serves as a professor of criminal justice at Abilene Christian University. She has quite a resume. She served as a member of the FBI crisis negotiation team for over a decade, and she also has served as a member of the FBI Organized Crime Task Force. In fact, I was talking with Brenda earlier, and she really served our country well. She served many years in the FBI. We know workplace violence is a growing concern in our hospitals. It affects our healthcare workers. It certainly impacts our patients, patient families, and we want to do everything we can to minimize any type of workplace violence in hospitals. Today, Dr. McAdoo is going to detail the signs of potential violence and how to prevent escalation, especially to help ensure a safe workplace. Before we begin, I want to tell you that if you have questions, type them in the question box, and at the end of her presentation, we'll try to answer them. And so without any further ado, it's my real privilege to introduce Dr. Brenda McAdoo.
Thank you so much. I am so glad to be with you today to talk about this great topic. When violence erupts in our workplace, whether that is in a hospital or a clinic, or on the street, it affects all parts of our lives, right? We have to deal with it right then, and we also have to deal with the aftermath. And in the healthcare community, you are dealing with both, right? You're dealing with the potential of there being workplace violence at your workplace, but then also having to deal with the consequences of that when they come into your emergency rooms and your clinics afterwards. And so I'm hoping today that we can talk not about definitions and not about, training that you've already heard, but we can give you some really good techniques, some steps to take when you are confronted with both maybe external and internal threats. So when we look at the threats that are coming into the healthcare community, it is both external and internal. Let me tell you a little bit about what I mean by that. So your external threats, that's going to be the active shooter, a spillover from domestic violence that's happening in the home, and one person works with you, but then their spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend shows up at the workplace. And then there's always the possibility of an external threat from terrorism. And so these are the types of threats that you train for at your work. You have done training in the, run, hide, fight. You've gotten, your organization's protocols for that. And so those external threats, I want to talk just a little bit about how you can see one of these external threats coming to fruition, and what that might look like. Before we turn to what's probably most likely to be something that you'll deal with, which are those internal threats and that interpersonal conflict that we could get into at any time. So if you have somebody who's on the pathway of violence, and this is again talking about someone who is progressing, and so you may have some interaction with them at the very beginning of when they are thinking about going on a pathway to violence. And we're just going to talk about the steps people go through so that you can be on the lookout for those things. And I always tell people, people ask me, well, how can I know somebody is actually going to do some violence, or they're actually going to follow through with the threats that they make? They say they're just joking, but how would I know? Well, you don't know. I mean, these are the types of threats that it is really hard to prevent. It's even harder to predict, but you can see pieces of the puzzle. And so when I tell people about, this pathway, you're really looking for a piece of the puzzle that you're going to help other people put together. So you may not have the entire puzzle. You may just have a few of the pieces here and there. But if you will actually report some of these things that you see along the pathway, then somebody can put that puzzle together and hopefully prevent violence from happening, especially in your workplace. And so as you think about, well, is there a personality type? Is there a profile? Can you show me a picture of somebody and I would know who they are? Well, there's not. There's not a profile. There's not one path that people take. But here are the steps that everybody who goes through this does take, that ends up exploding into violence. The first thing is they have a grievance. And so lots of times you'll be the one that they vent to, that they are upset about something that has happened either at work or in politics, or in their schooling, or wherever it is that they're in their kids' lives, wherever it is, they have a grievance against someone or an organization, or even a country. And that grievance that they hold on to and that they don't heal from, right? Then that turns into an idea about how they might change or fix their grievance. And that's the next step that people take. They start saying, things like, and they're not longer venting anymore. Now they're talking about, well, you know what? If I could just show them what was wrong with this organization, then it would change. Well, I might have to be really loud to show them. And so then they start doing some research and planning. And that research and planning is really all about how they can turn their idea into fixing their grievance or getting back at someone. And so, you can see that as we go up towards the actual plan, right? And then the actual violence, that there are things that they do along the way. They're looking up things about where a protest is going to be. They're looking up things about where a political figure might be at a certain time. They're doing research on how to create a certain chemical, how to do a poison, how to get a gun, any of those things that research and planning might come into. And then they're going to prepare. They're going to get the things necessary to make their idea that'll solve their grievance come to life. And so I want to give you a good example of this, because sometimes it's hard to see where somebody might be along this, or the types of things that you might want to look for. And so in order to do that, I want to show you this case. So there was someone who worked in the office of like a storage facility. So there was a whole bunch of individual storage facilities that people would rent. And they sat in the office every day. They said hello to people when they came to get their keys or sign up for their different storage facilities. And one day they were looking out their window at the different storage facilities. They all have their padlocks on it, and people could come and open them and get things out. But one day they noticed that there was a young man, and he was looking around. He was taking a long time to open the padlock. He kept stopping if people were driving by, and they just thought it was a little strange. So I'm going to ask you to think about how you feel or the things that you think when things just don't look right. When there's something that just doesn't feel right, it's out of place. It is something that isn't the way that it should be in your clinic or in your part of the hospital. And so this individual said it looked so strange. It was so out of character and out of place for the other people who would have been there that they decided to call 911. And did they know that he was up to no good? No, not for sure. They weren't 100%, but they went ahead and called. Well, when the police got there, he was just opening his storage facility, and inside were plans and bombs and guns. And he had a little manifesto that said that he was not only going to kill his family, but he was also going to bomb the school nearby. Well, if the police hadn't had someone call, if they hadn't taken the time to see something out of place that wasn't right, and then to make a call, then they wouldn't have gotten there and been able to prevent that. And so that's why it's so important to be able to see where people are on this pathway to violence. When we're thinking about those external threats, things that are the big events that we don't deal with every day, but that we need to be on the lookout for people who have a grievance, who started thinking about how to fix it or to get back at someone, and then take these other steps. Because you might just be that one person, like the worker in the storage facility, that you might actually be able to make a difference in somebody's life. One of the things that we talk about is being a bystander. And you're with people all day long in the healthcare community. You are always seeing things happen, watching people communicate with each other, whether it's families or patients. And, you know, one of the things that happens is we get afraid to say something because we don't want to offend someone, because we don't want to be wrong, because we're worried about liability. There's all sorts of reasons why people might just be embarrassed. All sorts of reasons why people don't speak up. But I'm going to suggest that one of the reasons why it's good to speak up when you know something's not wrong, when you have some emotional intelligence around a situation, is that we need people to move from being bystanders to upstanders. Somebody who's going to stand up for others, who's going to say the things necessary, who, if they do see something, they are going to say something. And that can be a great thing. And so as you think about those big external threats, knowing where people might be on that ladder, right? So those steps that go up, and being able to identify those, that is going to keep your places of work more safe. It's going to make sure that you stop things before they happen, that people can get help before they take those other steps that would lead them towards violence. The other thing that you're dealing with is the internal threats. But for the external ones, you just really need to follow your organization's protocols. Make sure that you are up to date on the run, hide, fight protocols, and then always be ready and aware because you will want to report those things that might end up into one of those big events. The internal threats, this is where I would love to spend the time, because I want you to walk away today, not with some definitions and some training that you've had before. I want you to walk away with something you can do to make a difference for interpersonal conflict and for those internal threats within your organization. So those might come from a colleague who's really upset about not getting a promotion, or about them not getting the shift that they want, or it could be some team dynamics where you're having trouble and someone gets really angry and they've been up for 36 hours and they can't control their emotions. You're also having trouble with patients. You might have some that are angry or upset, or they just don't understand what's going on, and so they erupt into violence. You also are dealing with family who's worried about their loved one who is a patient in your hospital, and they feel like they're not getting the care that they should, or they don't like what's going on. And so there are lots of different things that happen within a hospital or a clinic or an ER. And so these are the places where you can make a difference, both for yourself and how you handle it, but also for the others around you. And so, how do we deal with interpersonal conflict so that it doesn't erupt into violence? That's the big question. You want to be able to have the tools necessary to be able to stay calm. That's part of your training. It's part of what you do, but we can always be reminded that self-regulation is something that's really important. I love this quote from Stephen Covey, and this is one of the things that I want to focus on, is that between the stimulus that happens, right? So an event happens, somebody starts to yell, somebody starts to raise their voice, somebody is trying to get away. Between that stimulus that enters our brain and our response, there's a space. There's a space that we control where we can choose our response. And so that's that space that I want to talk about. If those of you that watch the Grammys and the Emmys, you might remember from a couple of years ago the time when Chris Rock was telling a joke, and Will Smith walked onto stage and slapped Chris Rock. He did not use the space in between the stimulus of Chris Rock telling a joke about Jada and Jada not liking it. And the time that he walked up there and slapped him, he did not use that space well. He did something in that 90 seconds that he regretted. And so we have that space that we can use well, and we need to be able to make a decision so that we can respond to people instead of reacting. And that's what you'll need in order to deal with these internal threats and this interpersonal conflict that shows up in your workplace. So I want you to really quick look at this. Put in the chat the first word that came into your mind when you saw her. Could be she's mad, that's dangerous, I'm out the door, any of those things. So put in the chat your first response. Here's the thing about our brains. There's probably someone on here who's an expert in neuroscience. I know just enough to be dangerous. But what I do know is that our bodies deal with emotion very quickly. Our brains are able to make a decision about her really, really quickly. We do first order thinking. We can do it fast. We know how we're going to react to her. But then we get this. Okay, so if you immediately know the answer to this problem, you can impress us and put it in the chat. But most of us would need pen and paper or the calculator on our phone. And as we're working through this problem, things are calm, we slow down, we have to think. And it's very different the way our brain deals with this problem rather than the angry woman. And so if you know that about your brain and how we respond to things, then we're able to figure out what we need to do in the meantime. So what happens to our brain is that the amygdala gets hijacked. So we have stimulation that comes in, we decide what to do with it, we're triggered, right? So we have an emotional reaction to it. And then remember, we have that little bit of space where we can choose whether to respond or react. And so it's the same thing with threats. Our brains are wired to be able to respond well to threats. When the alarm goes off and you're having to deal with a patient that's coding, or you've got gunshot victims who are coming into the ER, you go into overdrive. And your body and your brain are able to work together to do something very fast and react. But when something comes up as a threat that doesn't have to be dealt with immediately and the same way each time, you really need to be able to figure out how to, how to do that well. And so if we know that when the stimulus comes in, it goes to our emotional center first, that's when we have to use that space well, because we need to be able to think rationally about things. And I want you to think, have you ever said or done anything in this 90-second window when the chemicals are rushing through your body? You have about 90 seconds, right, before you can think rationally. And so have we ever done anything we wish we could take back? Absolutely. And if you didn't put yes in the comments, we're lying to ourselves, because all of us have lost this space right, to our emotions and what we're triggered with. But how do we avoid it's the better question. And if you can think about it ahead of time, then you can really prepare for those events and threats that are going to come at you. And that's what I want, you to be able to have. And so let's talk first about how we self-regulate. And we're just going to have 4 things. There are a lot more. And so in the chat, as we're going through these, I would love for those of you who have other self-regulation tools that you use for yourself, I would love for you to put them in the chat, because there are a lot of different things that work for people. You'll each need to find the one thing that helps you in the midst of that space that you're trying to be able to choose to make a rational decision when your emotions are triggered. And the first one that you can try is what I'm going to call a physical shifter. It will shift you back from just being emotional to be able to be rational. So you can do the box breathing. So this is a lot of research has come out around this from the Navy SEALs, from other operational teams in the military, that they do this a system of breathing. So you're going to, they use it like a box so that you can just think about it that way. So you're going to breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, and do it several times. And that breathing, that ability to calm your entire system down, helps you shift from being emotional to being rational. Another thing you can do is the 5 things. So you look around the room and you, in your head, you're going to name 5 things that you can see. You're going to name 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and then 1 thing that you can taste. And even just going through that to be able to name things in the room helps people shift from being in that emotional state, that amygdala hijack, if you will, to be able to be more rational and be able to respond rather than react. The second thing is a tactical pause. So why do we call it pause? Why do we call it tactical? Well, mostly because I come from law enforcement, but this is also used with the military. So a tactical pause gives the pause or the silence a job. So if you can take a pause and then do something else with it, look around, breathe, actually relax your shoulders. Do something that helps you in that little silence, in that moment, be able to shift from emotional to rational. That pause will give you that. So I have a 15-year-old son. I tell him it's his stop. Sometimes you just have to stop yourself from getting more worked up. You have to stop yourself from the emotional response that comes right away, because that might seem like the best thing to do, but it's not always. And so that pause can really help you. A third thing that can help is identifying your emotions. Now, not all of us are really good at that. I don't like how I feel, right? Is what some people will say. But if you could identify the emotion that you're feeling at that time, then you really can help your brain have that, maybe as a distraction, but also as a shift, right? So into thinking. And so you need to say, I'm feeling frustrated. And now I'm going to choose how to deal with it. I'm feeling angry, and maybe think about why. I'm feeling sad. Whatever that feeling is, the actual being able to identify it really helps you start to regulate it. And then the last thing is, sometimes you just got to give people grace. So I do a little bit of what I call reframing the story. If somebody's been really rude to me and I'm about to react to their rudeness, because I'm not going to let it pass, they've done it too many times. In that moment, can I also ask myself, is something else going on? Might something else be true? And that lets me think about whether or not they've had a bad day. They just did a double shift. On the way to work, they had a fight with their significant other. Whatever it is that might also be true, rather than me just thinking they're being rude to me, is helpful for me to be able to show them a little bit of grace. Give them, a little bit of the grace that probably I would want if I was in that situation. And so that's something that can help you also self-regulate. So I hope you're putting some of your ideas in the chat, because you'll be able to learn from each other as much as maybe be able to try some of these as well. All right, so we've talked about identifying the triggers, engaging a shifter, and then responding with intention. Those are the best tips that I have from years of working with people in the middle of crisis and chaos that you can be able to do for yourself to be able to self-regulate. When you're thinking about someone who's escalating, right? And they're coming at you, they're starting to talk to you rudely, they're starting to talk to you louder. You're having to do this self-regulation stuff internally, at the same time thinking about how you're going to react to them. That's what makes it difficult, because sometimes we just start reacting to them and we don't regulate our own emotions first. We're unable to truly help somebody else de-escalate if we haven't first regulated our own emotions. De-escalation is another one of those things that's really helpful in the healthcare industry. No matter if you are in a helper community where you're having to deal with other people in the midst of crisis and chaos all day long, then you need to have some de-escalation skills. And a lot of people who go into law enforcement, military, healthcare, teaching, a lot of those helper workplaces, right, where they're always dealing with other people that have their own problems and baggage. De-escalation, that ability to reduce the emotional intensity of a situation, is absolutely key. We do that through communication, empathy, intentional behavior to help people return to that rational state. So we talked a little bit about the people who have escalated. You know what that looks like. You deal with it all the time. People get a little bit agitated. They start to wring their hands. They start to tense up. They start to move around. They start to talk. Sometimes they curse or yell. But the intensity is what you're watching for. And once the intensity gets to a certain level, most of us either decide to get out and get help, or that we're going to try and intervene for somebody else. And that intervening space can be preventative of the violence that might come from it, but it also sometimes is dangerous. And so you have to know, like, when it is and what things you're good at diffusing, because it's the intensity you should be watching for in those perspectives. And so reducing that intensity is what de-escalation is all about. We talked a little bit about when people's emotions are high, then their rationality is low. This is true of all of us. It's why we have to self-regulate. But it's really true of people who are in the midst of a crisis or conflict. And once their emotions go up high and they keep them there, even after all the chemicals have rushed through their body, then you know that they are not able to rationally think. And so being logical with people who are really high emotion is not helpful. What is helpful is to be able to do some de-escalation techniques with them. And here's what our response would look like. Respecting their space. Maybe that's that we back up a little bit and we don't get so close to them. Giving them that space and time to be able to regulate themselves. Another thing that we can do is project calmness. A lot of people talk about this being calm in a storm. And you probably have experienced that there's always somebody on your team who seems to stay calm throughout whatever's going on. And so that calmness that you can project helps other people see that they should be doing that as well. It really works with kids. Not only did I deal with, thousands of people on the job who were high emotion, I also have 5 kids. And so they're adults now. But when they were young, projecting calmness and showing them that example really does help for people. So if somebody's yelling and you lower your voice so that they have to stop yelling to hear you, that can help people regulate their own emotions. Another thing that's really helpful as a response is identifying and respecting feelings. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. You also can repeat instructions really slow and low, not so that you're condescending, not so that you're talking down to them, but sometimes people need it repeated when their emotions are so high and they can't rationally think, that they need you to be calmer. They need you to be patient with them. You also can lighten the mood. I'm not talking about telling jokes, especially dad jokes, but I am talking about lightening the mood in that space, not being so anxious or intense yourself. But the biggest thing that I learned in 24 years with the FBI, working on suicide hotlines, dealing with international kidnappings, I learned that listening with empathy is what helped people the most. And I can't emphasize that enough. That if you will listen to people who have not been heard, who feel like they don't matter, who don't feel like they have control or a voice, if you will give them your attention and actually listen to them actively, and on top of that, show them some empathy, that will prevent a lot of the violence erupting, for the escalation of, whatever they're going through. That really does work for people. I will say this, being in the healthcare community, just like law enforcement, if we took on empathy for everybody and how they feel, we become back ineffective, right? We couldn't do our jobs because we're surrounded by chaos and conflict and hurt, and people in pain all day long. So I'm not suggesting that you practice feeling with others all the time, because we need to have that separate from us in the jobs that you've chosen. But you can show people that you listen to them, that you understand them, and that you care for them, that you have some empathy for them in that moment when they need it to be able to de-escalate. So think of it as something that you deploy, right? That you use at different times when you need to help somebody de-escalate, as opposed to having it open all the time, which would be impossible in our jobs. So there are 4 things that we can do to help others de-escalate. So the first one I've already been talking about, it is active listening. So the FBI and New York PD back in the 70s came up with 8 techniques of active listening that they used with hostage situations, with people who are barricaded, people that we needed to show that we are listening to them and giving them a place to vent, to be able to talk about things, to be able to then maybe eventually build some rapport, so then you can have some influence over people and change their behavior. And so active listening is one of those things that we can do. We also want to label, identify, and validate people's emotions, because lots of times people feel like they're not valued and that they haven't been heard. And it is always around their emotions where they feel the most hurt. There's also some grounding techniques that we can use, giving people space, but also then we'll talk about those grounding, and then offering options. Because when people feel out of control, they want to take back that control. And lots of times people do that through violence. So we want to offer them another way to do that. So here are the 8 active listening skills. I'm only going to go over 3 of the ones that I think are really helpful. But there's tons of information of this on the internet and in podcasts, where you can get some more information about this. And I'm sure that you've had some training as well. But these are really powerful for people to do 2 things. When somebody's venting and telling their story, you want them to continue to tell the story. You don't want to block them. You don't want to stop them. You don't want to distract them. And so these are things that encourage people to keep talking, but also show that you understand them at the same time. So we're not going to say I understand, because nobody can truly understand what someone else has gone through, but we're going to show them we understand through using these. So the first one is a minimal encourager. So a minimal encourager is just that. It is a sound or a word that you're saying that just kind of shows somebody you're there. So you use this when your aunt calls and tells you about their last doctor's appointment that you weren't at because you couldn't go because you were working. And they start talking about whatever ailment they have. And you're like, okay, yeah, whoo, wow. Anything like that. And nodding, right, if you're in person, or smiling. Any of those are a minimal encourager. It's just a brief sound that tells somebody, I'm still here and I'm listening and I understand what you're saying. The next one is an open-ended question. So these are questions that you can't answer with a yes or a no, or even just a one word. You want to have big open questions that encourage people to tell the rest of their story, because that's where people will actually feel heard, is if you've heard their whole story and their emotions around it. And so when you ask open questions like, what happened next, or what happened today, or tell me more about that, that encourages them to tell you things they might not normally tell people about that. And those are the pieces that people need to get out into the open, and it will make them feel heard and show them that you're interested in their story. The last one we'll talk about today is paraphrase. So you're listening to someone tell their long story. They vented about whatever maybe their grievances or something that happened to them or a hurt that they've experienced. You have busy jobs. But if you will take just a little bit of time to listen to some of the people who are difficult, you probably just thought of something in your head when I said difficult person. But that person, if you will listen to them for a little bit and then give them a paraphrase, you're going to repeat what you heard, but in your words and with no judgment, though we all like to do that. So they say something like, she's always talking and she never pays attention to what I say. And then you're like, so let me see if I got this right. She doesn't listen to you. No, she doesn't listen to me. And that's what hurts me the most, because I listen to her all the time. See, it just keeps them talking. It keeps them sharing their story and their hurt with you. As you think about those active listening skills, that kind of goes along with the next one, which is acknowledging emotion. So we want to acknowledge emotion. So when kids are young, we teach them the names for all the different feelings. We have all these emojis that have hundreds of different emotions attached to them, but people need to learn to name them out loud, what they're actually feeling inside. So they might say, I'm angry, and they might say, I'm upset. So the same way that we can name our emotions for ourselves when we self-regulate, we need other people to say those things as well. Well, what are you feeling right now? Well, what does that feel like in your body? And for some reason with our brains, if we're able to label that emotion, it actually creates space between the feeling and the response that we're having. And so it's a really good step for them in order to regulate that emotion that they have, if they'll actually acknowledge it and then name it. So for grounding, when emotions are really, really high, grounding helps us reconnect with the present. And so you can do lots of different things. You can plant your feet firmly. You can put your hand on a wall. You can press your fingertips together, or you can hold something to anchor attention. It's why stress balls or small fidget things are so important for people. We use them in therapy. We use them in physical therapy. I mean, there's so many places where touching something and holding it, right, takes your attention off that. You also can teach people to breathe out and release tension. Any of those things that help them figure out that they can be more grounded and the emotion doesn't have to be in control. So I don't know if you've seen the movie Inside Out. I love that movie with all the emotions. But our emotions shouldn't be at the driver's seat, right? They shouldn't have control of the car all the time. They're really good to have on the dashboard to use when we need them, but we don't want them holding the steering wheel. We want the rest of our thinking brain to be holding that steering wheel. And so sometimes we have to do things like grounding ourselves so that our emotions aren't the ones driving the train. The last thing that you can do to help somebody else de-escalate themselves is to offer options, because none of us wants to feel out of control. We really need to have small choices to be able to restore the sense of that. And people who are in a hospital whose family member is unconscious, they're having to make decisions and they're upset because things aren't going the way that they thought they would go, or they're not going the way that they want for their family member. Sometimes they just need some small choices to restore that sense of control. So wouldn't it be okay to ask, do you want to go to x-ray now or in 10 minutes? Or maybe put 2 minutes if you're under a time crunch, whatever that is. But giving them some of those options to be able to do something might be helpful for them to be able to feel like they're back in control again. Do you want to sign the form now or when the doctor gets here? Any of those things that you can do that offer somebody an option around a time when they're escalating will show them that you're on their side of the table, not as an adversary. And so any of those things that you can do to put the problem on the other side of the table and sit with them so that you aren't focusing on them as a person, but rather both of you are focusing on the problem can be really helpful in those spaces to be able to help people calm down and be able to de-escalate. The whole goal around this, being able to use those, is to be able to stop the cycle before they escalate into violence. And so many people just leave and go get somebody else, or they just are dismissive and ignore them. But if we can engage with people and help them stop the cycle so that they can respond rather than react, which is what we're trying to do for ourselves. I want to be the sort of person that chooses, even when I'm emotional, to respond rather than just react with my emotions. And so if we can just take a few minutes, right, to be able to help other people do that, it will really change the dynamics in our workplace. And the whole goal around knowing what workplace violence is and then what to do with it, what reactions you need to have, what protocols your organization has, is to be able to stop the small eruptions of violence if you can. And these are some things that you can do to be able to do that. Marie Angelou has this great quote. And when I was dealing with people with really high emotions, I would spend, let's say, 5 or 6 days with somebody if they had an international kidnapping or trying to ransom their loved one back, or talking to somebody on the suicide hotline. They're probably not going to remember anything of exactly what I said. They're not going to remember, where we were or what we did. I mean, maybe where we were, because trauma sometimes imprints those things on us. But you know what they're going to remember? They're going to remember how I made them feel. And the people that you deal with every day, that you deal with that are in crisis and chaos, they're going to remember how you made them feel, for good or for bad. And, there's lots of reasons why we should treat people well. One of them is so we don't get bad complaints, right? But there's also good reasons so that we're going to help people be able to regulate their emotions so that they don't get to the point where they're screaming and yelling and cursing and maybe erupting into violence. And so that is, a big reason why we always want to remember to regulate ourselves, help people regulate their own emotions so that they do not get to the point where they are erupting into violence. Okay, so I want to take just 5 or 10 minutes and answer any of your questions that you have. And then I'm going to turn it over to Matt Daniels, who's got some other things just to let you know about ACU.
Thank you so much, Brenda. What great advice. And again, if you have a question, please put them in the question box, or you can put it in the chat box. If you put it in the Q&A box, we'll find it. So, Brenda, while we're waiting for some of those questions, I had one. In your negotiations with people, have you used reflective response, the mirroring, like, if you're in a tough hostage negotiation, go, look, I understand you're having a tough time. Has that been effective?
So I will say, I try and never say I understand. And here's why. Because I really, in dealing with people over years and years time, I found that there is no one person in the world who has had the exact same experience I have, and I have not had their same experience. And so saying I understand sometimes makes people say, do you really? But what does work with people is to be able to take the words that they're using and reflect those back to them. And so that reflection mirroring that you're talking about might look a little bit like this. Somebody says, I just don't like it when I get stuck in traffic. It really triggers me. It makes me upset. And I can't understand why we're not moving. And I say, not moving? Yeah, I'm not moving. I'd rather go way around on 635 than to go straight up 35, because I need to be moving. Because if I'm not, I just feel I get this heat inside and I get really mad. And then it makes me mad at all the other cars. All the other cars. Yeah, I'm mad at all the other cars. So that tiny bit of mirroring in there, it does what all the other active listening skills do. And it just continues the conversation. And that's what people need, to be able to feel heard, right? To feel a certain way. Then you really want somebody who's going to keep asking you questions or keep continuing you to talk. And so that reflection, you don't want to use it all the time because you sound like a parrot, but you do want to use it enough that it draws out somebody's story.
Good point. Good point. Here's an excellent question somebody just put in. How do cultural awareness impact the methods?
Yeah. People at their core are the same. But there are some cultural things that you can be aware of to be able to have conversations with people. Because there are some, and again, I would say personalities and cultures would both go into this. Some people who are really direct, right? Their conversation is direct. The way they speak is direct. Other people have a lot of, like, they want to do a lot of chit chat. They want to talk about personal things before they talk about something important or work wise. And so I think that culturally, you need to be aware of people's patterns of communication, because that can make a difference in how you use these techniques. You always, I think sometimes gender can play into that too, because you'd never want to be, condescending or talk down to someone, or to be dismissive about something that because you just didn't understand how somebody views the world. One of the things I love Brene Brown's stuff. She talks about perspective taking. And when we're showing empathy to others, we also have to take their perspective, because how we see the world is not how everybody else sees it. And so to be able to, I don't like the step in somebody else's shoes because we really can't, but that idea that you could turn the mirror, right? To be able to see what they see, to be able to a little bit understand their perspective, and see that there might be another perspective than your own. That I think will help you with the cultural piece as well.
Great. You know, I was talking to a state legislature about violence in hospitals, and I told her that we wanted support for a bill to help protect hospital workers. And before I finished, she raised her hand, and I said, excuse me, you don't want to talk about this? She said, you don't have to convince me. I was a nurse before I was a state legislature. My first week in the emergency room, a patient broke my ankle. So I know all about it. But which brings me to this question that somebody submitted. When do you make the determination to try de-escalation, or when do you get out or move and get out of the situation?
Yeah. So I'd try some of the de-escalation stuff really early. Like, make it a point to start doing that you just try and help people with their emotions before it's gotten out of control. Because if you wait till things get out of control and they're almost, and you can tell when they're almost towards violence, then you probably waited too long to use the de-escalation techniques. So I would use those way earlier. If somebody has already gotten to the point where they are taking steps towards violence, or that has already erupted, it's time to get out and get help, right? And to report it. But de-escalation can really be used effectively if you do it early on in their escalation.
Great. I think we got time for another question before we turn it over to Matt. I'm going to kind of put you on the spot, Brenda, and it's probably unfair. In your days when you were dealing with hostage negotiation, do de-escalation techniques work on everyone?
That's a really good question. And I would say no. And all of you probably, when he asked that question, thought about somebody in your family or somebody that you've dealt with or a patient where things just went wrong and you couldn't make them right. Like you couldn't pacify them. You couldn't say enough things. You couldn't apologize enough. And there are some people who are unwilling, right, to regulate their emotions because they like feeling out of control or because they've learned it gets them what they want. And so you can try these just like you can try all of your other tools that you have in dealing with people in interpersonal communication and in conflict. But the de-escalation tools do not work on everyone. And again, there may be some mental health issues going on, or that might just be a choice that they want to be angry and they want to be violent. And so don't feel like you're a failure if you come across someone who it doesn't work on and it's worked the 20 times before, because and that's what's interesting about people, right? They're unpredictable. And so just know that if it doesn't work, don't keep trying everything. Get some help and report it.
Thank you. Brenda, you've given us great information. You've done an excellent job. And so I'm going to let you introduce Matt and Tara.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me here. I enjoy being with you today. And hopefully something I said helps you in your personal life or your professional. So I want to turn it over to Dr. Matt Daniels and to Tara Franklin to talk about ACU and the opportunities there.
Thank you, Brenda. Appreciate all the information that you shared with our partners at the DFW Hospital Council today. I'm Mike Daniel, and I'm the AVP for Partnership Development. I'm actually going to hand this over to Tara, who's our Strategic Partnership Executive, who manages the DFW Hospital Council Partnership, to talk a little bit about the benefits that are extended to you through this unique partnership that we have.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, my name is Tara Franklin, and I'm the Strategic Partnership Executive at Abilene Christian University. I just want to take a minute to share this opportunity with all of you. As employees of hospitals that are affiliated with the DFW Hospital Council, you are eligible to receive tuition discounts through ACU and have your application fee waived. You also have access to a dedicated support team through enrollment through graduation. ACU offers over 50 degree programs that are 100% online with certificates as well. They're specifically designed for working professionals. Some of our most popular programs for healthcare employees include our healthcare administration, business and organizational leadership, cybersecurity, our social work program, and we also have a Doctor of Nursing practice, and it includes a BSN to a DNP fast track pathway. And I'm also very excited to announce that starting in spring 2026, we will have an Associates of Applied Science in Nursing available too. There is a link and a QR scan on the screen if you want to use those to find out some more information. Thank you for joining again today. We hope to support your continued growth and success through education.
Well, thank you, Matt and Tara. We really appreciate it. And Brenda, once again, thank you for an excellent presentation. For those that are on and people that registered, I think the PowerPoint is going to be made available to you by Chris Wilson. And also, Chris sends out the recording of this webinar to all the people that registered. So on behalf of the DFW Hospital Council, we once again thank ACU. We enjoy our partnership with you through your associate membership. And this concludes our webinar, and I hope everyone has a safe rest of the day. Thank you.